controversial bird that's known as the undertaker of the bush. Whether you love them or hate them, and most people have a strong opinion, vulture species are steps away from spending time with the dodo on the list of extinction. What's to stop these birds from becoming just another memory?
She's traveling through the wild. She's searching for the truth. A courageous child. She's gonna find the proof. Picking up the trail. She's gonna find the answers. She's gonna tell the tale. She's gonna tell the tale. Keep it wild. Keep it free. This could be our last chance to see.
The Cape vulture is the only vulture species endemic to southern Africa, and they're increasingly under threat. Classified as vulnerable on the IUCN Red List, our journey today takes us to various locations around Gauteng in search of these misunderstood birds, and to meet some of the people who are dedicated to conserving them.
With a wingspan of just under 3 meters, vultures are synonymous with the majesty of an African sky. Slow to breed and facing silent persecution from mankind's steady population increase, this is a bird species that's flying low under the extinction radar.
The endless networks of electrical power pulsing across the country cause many vulture deaths, electrocuting the birds as they perch or build their nests on the pylons. Unseen conductors strung across the vulture's flight path cause injury and entanglement. Urban sprawl overtakes dwindling habitats, resulting in less prey on which to feed, and fewer natural trees means no nests and no perches for these great birds.
Cape vultures are the only vulture species that are proudly South African, the only vulture species that are endemic to South African skies. Even more reason for us to conserve these misunderstood birds of the bush.
So where do vultures go when they're hungry and need something to eat? Well, they head on down to their local Vulture Restaurant, regularly stocked and conveniently situated where these carrion eaters like to hang out.
Restaurants and meal times, dining out, a social gathering of hungry tummies.
Between chemicals and toxins, poisoning potential snacks, and a diminishing natural prey base, finding a feast is becoming a tricky business for a hungry vulture.
These large birds consume large amounts.
Vulture restaurants serve safe and uncontaminated carcasses, animals that died naturally or were healthy when killed. A vulture's anatomy is perfectly designed for picking around a carcass. Long, naked necks and small heads allow them to reach deep inside rib cages. They rip flesh from bones with their strong, hooked beaks, and their sharp claws are used like forks to hold chunks of meat. Feeding is a very social event, with masses of birds gathering in a frenzy to share the spoils. And the pecking order is quite distinct, with other birds respectfully waiting their turn while the Cape vultures jockey for position.
There's a lot more to managing a restaurant than initially meets the eye. Ed, vultures are very dependent on private landowners when it comes to their survival. Why did you decide to start a vulture restaurant?
When we decided to start a vulture restaurant 20 years ago, there were only about 20 vultures operating in this part of the world, in this area. And since we've been introducing the vulture restaurant, the numbers have gone up to about 200, 300. So we realized that they were threatened at that particular stage and we had to do something about it.
How do you decide what carcasses to put out?
Well, you've got to be very careful, obviously. I mean, if a carcass has died from natural circumstances, it's not all that serious, because that's what vultures are eating in nature. But obviously, once it's been treated by a veterinarian, then it becomes a different story. Then you've got to be very careful. careful what they actually treated the particular animal with, you see.
'Cause 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 'c Good to know that a lot of care is taken in the conservation of these Cape vultures.
Ed, the decor on your restaurant is slightly different from other vulture restaurants because you have an enclosure that's right nearby. Why?
For research purposes only.
The Rhino and Lion Nature Reserve works in research partnership with other vulture conservationists, including the manager of the vulture program, Kerry Vulture, also known as the Vulture Lady. Not much is known about these undertakers of the veld, so Kerry records statistics and gathers research that plays a future role in the conservation of these birds.
Vultures have got this really bad reputation of being ugly, sort of disease-ridden birds. That's, of course, not true.
Well, I wouldn't say they're nice looking. I mean, certainly not. It's probably not true, but they've got a function in the ecosystem and they're performing that very well.
Vultures are the picket-ups of the bush, playing an important ecological role. By rapidly consuming the remains of dead animals, they prevent carcasses from acting as host to various diseases that may spread to livestock. Vultures also alert farmers to dead cattle, helping to avoid potential disease outbreaks. Nice and full after our restaurant experience, Kerry and I head to the De Vult Vulture Unit, a rehabilitation facility for injured, poisoned and disabled vultures.
Four birds are about to be caged. What's the problem?
They were identified as having a bit of lameness, and the one vulture had a wing problem. So Kerry and the management group here at De Vult asked me to have a look at them and identify possibly bumblefoot and see what's wrong.
Catching a vulture is not as easy as you might think.
That one there, with the wing. There, that one.
Yeah.
The first problem is to establish the right bird to catch.
That one.
The birds are being very uncooperative, and safety comes first. We don't want them to hurt themselves flying into the fence. But Amos wins. Eventually, he nabs his first vulture, holding its feet and neck firmly to prevent escape, or perhaps a nasty peck.
Okay, bird number one.
That's it.
3 more to go. It's a process, isn't it?
Yeah, it's not something that you can just dart, you know, stand there with your dart gun. Dart. You physically have to work. It's hands-on.
So, I mean, no bird can really be darted, hey?
No.
I mean, just because they're too delicate.
They're much too delicate, yeah.
And safely into a cage for bird number one.
She's searching for the truth.
You're watching Wild Limited. We're at the De Vult examination rooms, where we're doing checkups on injured Cape vultures. These birds are often damaged by power line collisions or as a consequence of urban encroachment. One by one, these great scavengers are gently but firmly carried indoors, where they will be thoroughly inspected.
You want to give it a good wash for me, and then we can have a closer look.
Dr. Peter Caldwell is the vet on duty.
Yeah, both eat at the same time.
And he's made a diagnosis of bumblefoot, a bacterial infection and inflammatory reaction on the bird's claws.
We're just using a disinfectant over here. We're washing the feet. Bumblefoot is a condition that normally affects the plantar region of the metatarsus of the feet, which is the bottom part. There we go, in this area, yeah.
Bumblefoot, or ulcerative pododermatitis, is much more likely to occur in captive birds than those in the wild. One cause of bumblefoot is pressure on the feet. In captivity, vultures perch more often and for longer periods of time than when they're out in the wild.
Peter, just tell us what it is that you've discovered and what the ensuing treatment is with this case of bumblefoot.
This is a very mild to moderate case, and it's normally a condition from in birds that are in captive conditions because they sit and perch for very long, and it predisposes them to inflammation and leads on to secondary infection. We treat with anti-inflammatories and antibiotics, and we give a course of 5 days of antibiotics and anti-inflammatories, and they recover 100%. But if it's a condition like a grade 3 bumblefoot, where it's actually gone into the bone and the tendons and the ligaments, then the prognosis is very poor. We take X-rays to determine the extent of the inflammation, and if it's progressed too far, the only option is to euthanize the bird. There's nothing we can do medically for this animal.
Okay, well, at least we know that she's going to be okay.
I definitely think she'll be fine, yes. Can I inject him quickly? All right. I'm going to inject into the breast muscle.
Adult Cape vultures have a long, thick, muscular, bluish neck. They have few feathers on their heads and neck, as these would become quite dirty when digging their heads into a carcass, and it's impossible for a vulture to clean his own head.
While we've got the bird here, Kerry's able to look into her eye, and that eye gives us a lot of information about the vulture. Kerry, what do you see?
Okay, if you can see, her eye is bright yellow, which gives us an indication of how old she is. These birds reach sexual maturity at about 7, and their eyes only start going yellow at about 7. She's anywhere from 15 years upwards.
And that's because it's a lighter gold color.
Exactly. The brighter yellow the eye, the older the bird is, and her eyes, as you can see, very bright yellow.
Cape vultures have a lifespan of around 25 years. That is, those that are lucky enough to live to old age, given their vulnerable conservation status. Treatment over, it's on to the next bird's examination.
How much does this one weigh, Kerry?
It's more than 12 k's.
More than 12. All right.
This bird has a foot infection, which makes it predisposed to bumblefoot.
Wow. There's a thorn in there with a lot of pus coming out of there. And that is a predisposition to bumblefoot.
And the fact that you've got a thorn, I suppose this tells us that even wild vultures can get bumblefoot.
Absolutely, exactly. I mean, they can just go landing and then step in a thorn. Thorn can be stuck deep in. Obviously, thorn contains a lot of bacteria, starts growing inside the foot, and that's it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to flush this out with a disinfectant.
The people dedicated to vulture conservation are really making a difference. These birds are lucky. Not so the many wild birds that aren't found in time and don't have the luxury of treatment and rehabilitation.
You can see the swelling of these joints. And these joints are super swollen. This is a typical inflammatory bumblefoot condition. For the next 5 days, we're going to be given strong anti-inflammatory. I'm going to flash some more.
Man's ignorance is definitely taking its toll on vulture species. While Dr. Caldwell finishes up her critical duty of healing and rehabilitation, Kerry and I are off to Onderstepoort to follow up on another injured vulture.
In mankind's quest for advancement, we often don't stop to consider the impact of our actions on the natural environment. Our Onderstepoort case is a prime example, a bird that was badly injured by flying into an artificial structure. Having been operated on some weeks ago, she's heading back for a checkup and hopefully to get her pins in her leg removed. And this one's a feisty young female.
Get the mask on, let me do it.